thought long and hard about what I wanted to say in the introduction today. I felt quite rattled, I suppose, with what's been, been going on in the news, especially these last few weeks, let alone years. And it's kind of taken over my brain. But I recalled a few words from Joe Strummer many years ago when he said people out there are doing bad things to each other. It's because they're being dehumanized. It's time to take humanity back into the center of the ring and follow that for a time. Music has always been there for me. It's always been my friend, and I'm pretty sure that it always will be. It's like it's the one constant, and I think that as humans, we need some constants in our lives when we live in, what feels like endless uncertainty and volatility. I often wonder what role music has to play today, and I think this is one of them. Whether you are a musician, whether you're a creator, listener, whatever, it's having that ability to connect and be relatable. So I'm delighted to have with me today a songwriter who embodies that humanity, that connection, and blends really the kind of like the old school with the new school in songwriting and arrangement that really are as individualistic as they are beautiful. So Dani Larkin, welcome. Thanks so much, Dani, and really welcome. Thanks so much for taking the time to come on.
Oh, it's a real pleasure to be here, Giles. And yeah, I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I love talking about mindset, in the context of your kind of music and life. But you've obviously got, a big second record coming out on 30th of January, and we're recording this like a couple of weeks beforehand. How are you feeling now?
Oh, what a
The big
question to
question.
start with. How am I feeling now? Honestly, I'm really excited.
Mm,
I am just so excited. It kind of feels like a first record for me because I put my first record out in 2021 and we were all
mm,
in lockdown. Um, and that was an incredible, I had an incredible time touring off the back of that and all of those things.
mm.
So, but this kind of feels like almost like the first one for me personally. And, um, I have to say there's definitely different times in being an artist and being a musician where you can move through periods of doubt or fear or
Mm.
what am I doing, and maybe those things come up. And honestly, for about 2 months now, none of those things have appeared for me, and
Wow.
that in the run up to a huge record, I think is nothing short of a miracle.
It's incredible.
And I know for everyone is different and they're putting out records. um Really, I'm just excited for people to hear it. um and of course, there are all the things like the expectations and the dreams and the hopes
Yeah.
and the possibilities. Um, but apart from anything else, I just love the record and I love the music, and I hope people will too.
Yeah. I mean, it's a phenomenal record. I love it. I think it's so great. And I like I said in the intro, I mean, I do love that I don't know, like kind of combination of how you kind of combining the old school and the new school, like kind of almost like that kind of respect for the tradition, and then, but your very individual take on it. Um, did it kind of feel like that?
Yeah, it's a really funny thing in terms of I come from a family that plays music. My granda played in the
Mm,
show bands throughout Northern Ireland,
yeah.
effectively during the Troubles, which we don't really talk about a whole lot, but uh,
Mm,
there's the kind of the music is within me from that perspective, but not necessarily the tradition. It wasn't,
yeah.
um, the tradition of here are these traditional songs and these are the songs that we sing. It was more whatever music you want to play or sing is what's welcome and encouraged.
Yeah.
I think that for me was a really helpful and important distinction to make to, a 6 or 7 year old listening to songs on the radio and singing them,
Mm,
you know, and then alongside that, of course, um, falling in love for me then with the kind of Irish traditional repertoire, of which there are just thousands and thousands of songs and tunes. Um,
Mm,
and I think for, with this record with Next of Kin, I really hadn't planned on putting any traditional songs on the record, but somehow three
yeah.
have ended up there. And I think that's something to do with like a deeper sense of connecting with myself when I was writing these songs. Actually, in this room that I'm having this conversation, and a lot of these songs
Okay.
written um, and first demoed. Um, there was something that was just calling me, like with Danny Boy, for example.
Mm,
Um, it was just after Sinead O'Connor had passed away, and I'd seen a video of her on the Late Late Show, and she sang a version of Danny Boy, and it broke my heart. And
yeah.
I knew in that moment that that song had to be on the record, and I knew in that moment it had to be the last song on the record. Um,
Yeah.
and it's, a testament to Sinead and all that she gave us.
Mm,
Also a little bit playful in, Danny Boy and me being called Danny, and a little bit of mischief
yeah.
alongside it. It's all there. Don't want to give away too much, but I suppose when you release a record, the point is to give it away to people.
To
So,
talk. Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
Well, it's interesting you say that because I mean, and I know that from some other conversations, some musicians feel that when they release a record, it's almost like, okay, I'm giving away, not giving away, but a part of you is kind of leaving yourself, and then it becomes the public's.
yeah, it's so true, and it is so bizarre on a lot,
Mm,
on a lot of different levels. I think unless you release your work or your own work in some capacity, it maybe isn't something one can fully understand the feeling of, you know.
mm,
Um, like I was watching the Nina Simone documentary the other evening, and she was saying about, you can't tell people what it's like to be in love. You can only feel it, but you can never describe that. And that's almost the feeling that I have with putting out work and releasing work, and releasing this particular body of work, which means a great deal to me.
yeah.
Um, it's like you can't possibly describe it, but it is a sense of loss in a way, which is a very
Mm,
curious thing because, I was having a conversation with my friend Alan McFadden, who's in You Vagabonds, and
mm,
um, he was like, I was like, I have new music out this week. I'm really excited. And he was like, yeah, and we just don't talk about the sense of loss that comes when you put
yeah.
something out. Um,
Yeah.
and that changes between whether, if it's a single, the sense of loss is slightly different as opposed
Yeah.
to a full record, which this is. And, um, you know, I think that loss is part of it, absolutely. And you're 100% right in saying that a part of yourself is almost you're releasing it, you're letting it go, you're saying
Yeah.
goodbye. And I'm also, in all of that, I mean, I'm in awe of that entire process. I have no idea how it happens. I just know that it does.
Yeah.
And there are things that I do, on release day, I make sure I wake up, quite early, maybe 6 or half 6 in the morning, and have my hot water and do a little bit of writing,
Yeah.
because I want to have a little bit of time to myself, and to acknowledge that, and create
Yeah.
that space. Um, and it's not a loss or a grief in the sense of despair or sadness.
Mm,
It's a release in a lot of different ways, of
yeah.
just letting it go. And then the wonderful thing about letting it go, as well as hopefully people listening to the work and buying the record and coming to the shows, is that
Yeah.
you get to start the process all over again, you know
Yes. Yes.
because
It's
you're
true.
creating space, so
Yeah.
um yeah.
I guess with the I mean I sort of wonder with what you were talking about the sort of Sinead and that particular sort of moment then sort of hitting you and sort of appealing to you. And I guess there's a kind of particular moments with the shifts in our identity and who we sort of feel we are with what we're kind of experiencing as a as a person. That if you went back 3 years, it may not, I don't know, it may not have affected you as much as it did, kind of right now, or when you were writing. And it's funny how there are some kind of moments that with what we're going through, we just identify with them. And I think that there's this kind of word. I can't remember if I mentioned it in my intro, but like relatability or being relatable, and I think that for me has become a word that has become so overused that it's kind of lost its meaning a little bit. But if you look at the true kind of meaning of it, those kind of moments when something like hits you and it's like, oh fuck, I can really sort of relate to that. Those kind of things are so powerful, and I think again with some of the stuff that's going on, in the wider world, you know, having those moments where you relate to someone or something, I just think they're kind of really important. For me, they are.
Yeah, and I think, that's the crux of what it means to be human. It's not,
Mm,
for me, relating or relatability is maybe almost like the first layer or a surface layer, and we go slightly deeper, and then it's a sense of connection. And then
yeah,
we go slightly deeper, as we excavate all of those layers, fundamentally we're all the same and we all are looking for the same thing. It's that sense of
yeah,
belonging, it's
mm,
a sense of connection that, I think if we lived in a different world, if we lived in a different society, even, which is maybe easier to imagine than a different world, you know,
yeah, yeah,
we lived in a slightly different society, those hurdles to the vulnerability and connection that can happen, you know, for me, like I felt connected to Sinead in that moment, watching
mm,
that video. But how is that possible? Like,
mm,
she'd passed away. There's something deeper, I think, within us that wants to
yeah,
connect with each other.
yeah.
I think music is one of the magical ways to do that.
I
Um,
agree.
you know, if we even leave artists out of it, I just think music has a real power and place to transform and um
Yeah.
yeah, it's just magic really, isn't it?
I think you're totally right. It's interesting, even the podcast that I had that's out at the moment, last recorded a few weeks ago. Massimo from the band Zoos, and he was saying something very very similar. Their music is very kind of like it's extremely heavy and very sort of spiritual in its way, and that he said, that I realized that music was much bigger and much more powerful than I ever thought it was. When I kind of started out, and you're totally right that it's the strangest phenomenon. It really is. It can like have this effect where it kind of makes you do things with your limbs, kind of like involuntarily. You think, oh, what happened there?
Yeah, and that's it, right? Sometimes the conversation can lean into a place where it's like, oh, it has to be this big, deep thing. But at the end of the day, you walk into a room and you wiggle, and then you
Yeah,
feel better, and you leave
yeah,
the room, and you're like, whoa, what just happened there?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Whether that's the movement or the music, there's something very physical, very kinetic in it.
Mm,
Say that, being a singer-songwriter and, you know, with this record in particular with Next of Kin, like, for me, when I plan out my live sets, there is a journey, for want of a much better word, of
mm,
it starts as the record is intended with that first breath and in that moment of darkness before dawn.
yeah,
And in the live set, that, as the live set goes on, we move into a space of, full morning sun effectively. And, you know, people aren't necessarily, dancing at the beginning, but by the end of the set,
yeah,
that really, people are moved in a folk gig effectively or in a singer-songwriter world um to dance, clap it's
yeah,
there's no end to the wonder. A friend of mine, another musician, said to me, music is the most present mystery that we have. And I was like,
Mm,
oh, I sat on that for about 3 months. I'm still thinking about it, you
yeah.
know?
So, what if it's not too personal, but what was going on in your life that sort of influenced the record, the kind of like the genesis of it and how it sort of evolved.
Genesis, what a great word. I don't think we use that enough. I'm writing it down that if you see it up in another record, you call me for royalty. Yeah, it's funny. I had just released Notes in 21. I played
Mm,
first festival because live shows were so few and far between.
yeah,
Um, every moment was savored, right? Like it was
yeah,
a real euphoric time to have a first record out and to get to play it. And I was playing a festival um, here in the north, in the north of Ireland, and it's called Stendhal. And I remember waking up the next day after doing a headline show and being like, my next record is called Next of Kin. And that was it. It was just,
wow.
there was no it's just very simple and straightforward. And, it took a little while. And I mean, that was 21. And now the record's coming out in 26.
Yeah.
Um, like those things just take a little while and there's no rush. There's no such, you can't, I mean, I couldn't possibly rush a song along even if I wanted to.
Mm,
Um, and so over the next couple of years, the songs just started to come together. And when I went into the studio to make this record with Ruth O'Mahony Brady, who's worked with Sam Smith and The Frames and Gorillaz, like she's just amazing. Actually, I'd never met her before, and I phoned her and I said, "Can we make a record?" And she was like, "Yeah," and I was like, "Great." And like I sent her the demos, and the songs were 90% done. Because I worked from my own studio as well. Um, by the time we kind of got in, they were 90% there. But uh, I went in with 20 songs, to strip back to the 11 that have made it on the record. And um, I hadn't really realized, but with each song that wanted to be on there, it taught me something a little bit more about myself or a little bit more about, what it means to be someone's next of kin. That almost there's
mm,
this sense of reverence that comes with it, or that it has to look or feel a certain way, like it has to be a husband or a wife,
mm,
um, culturally. And for me,
yeah,
it was as much about breaking down those barriers. You know, who's your 3 a.m. call? Who do you want to go out with? Who do you want
mm,
a cup of tea with? And that it's not just one person, it's a community. And it doesn't even have to be anybody else. How you show up for yourself in those
mm,
moments when you really need them. And so each song on that kind of excavates and explores all of those facets. Like Morning is an arrangement of the 1931 hymn Morning is Broken. And it's the
yeah,
first that I wrote when I opened my studio and I sat down with my guitar. And there was
yeah,
I hadn't planned to write it, but the song arrived. And um, when those moments start to happen, um, in the same way with She Moved Through the Fair, I got a call from someone asking me to audition for a part in a film. Um, and they wanted me to play banjo and sing a traditional track. And I'd watched some of Margaret Barry singing and her version of She Moved Through the Fair. And then
mm,
when that arrangement came along, it was the same thing. It was like oh, this is where this belongs, you know?
mm,
And with She Moved Through the Fair, there's a field recording from my time in Palestine, in Nablus, in the West Bank, and it's just a recording of me walking through the souk, walking through the markets. And I took that in 2016, and
mm,
not with any intention or attention to do anything with it.
mm,
Um, but when She Moved Through the Fair came along, then I realized, oh, that's the missing piece of the puzzle. This is the
yeah,
context that makes the song make sense and the recording make sense. Um,
mm,
and, if I think on it now, I mean, it's really just all of those little moments coming together to then make a big thing happen, and
Yeah.
trust it. Trust in yourself, and um that can be an incredibly challenging thing to do at times.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm very grateful that for me, with the music itself, um, I can quite quickly discern yes or no, or I trust this part, or this part doesn't quite make sense, so I'll come back to that later.
Yeah.
Um, and it's, yeah, I mean, I think you can tell I really enjoyed making the
Oh
record.
yeah, absolutely I can. Absolutely I can. Yeah. I mean there's so much in there. I like to start with, I love the bit where you know about next of kin and how you're kind of challenging those, that particular, I guess, kind of societal definition. And I
Mm,
think you're right that I mean there are so many I've come to realize as well that there are so many things that we've have become part of our fabric, who we are, how we operate in the world, that are almost like, well, that's how it's always been done, or
mm,
that's how it's always been. And I think that there's a lot of those things that are we're right to sort of challenge them. Not necessarily because we want to sort of dismantle anything, but to try and kind of break down that okay, well it could be different to what we expect or what we've sort of been used to. I mean, I remember, I mean, not to get too morose, but I remember when my a few years ago when my dad died, and I at the time that I was with him when he did, at the time I had no idea how to react.
mm,
I didn't know, and you think, and I remember thinking at the time, I'm supposed to be reacting a certain way, and I just didn't know. And then I thought after when some time had gone by, then I started thinking, why did I think that? Why did I think that this is how I'm supposed to do things? And that made me then think about other things, like, um, for example, perfectionism. For example, we become a society that's obsessed with doing things perfectly right, and that's not necessary. I mean, if you're a surgeon, then yeah, I mean that's fair, it's kind of fair enough. But there are so many things where we push ourselves to things and we don't necessarily need to, and we can kind of break those down. So I love what you're doing with that. Those kind of notions and kind of ideas, and perhaps giving people something to think about.
yeah, well, thank you for telling me about your dad, and I'm sorry.
Oh no, 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 it's fine. No,
It's I
I
know.
didn't mean to bring that up. It just sort of immediately came to me that I thought, well, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. Do you know what I mean, though?
Absolutely. And, you know, that's the point of connection, right? Where it's
Mm,
okay, how do we, and for me with next of kin, you know, perhaps an inkling of how do we lift next of kin from being something that we fill in when we're at the hospital with someone
yeah,
to something that encapsulates joy or
yeah,
love or friendship,
yeah,
and also those moments of grief when people pass away and we don't know what to do or how to do. And
yeah,
actually, I if anyone has any answers, that would be great. In my experience, it's just figuring it out day to day and what that looks like.
mm,
And so for me, next of kin juxtaposes all of those things. It's not one thing or the other. It's not this or that. It's not black or white. It's
yeah,
not divisive. It's everything. So
yeah,
that's, I suppose, inherent in the title, but then it's also inherent in the track list and in the songs. You
mm,
know, like Love and Liberation came for me. It's a tune. It's the second last track on the record, and um, it came from watching a video of Kwame Ture. I hope I'm
mm,
pronouncing correctly. Um, where he has a conversation and he says, there's a difference. Watch the video. Does a much better job of what I'm about to do. He talks about peace and liberation and how you can have peace and injustice, and peace is not the same
mm,
as freedom or equality, and that liberation um, is really something quite different. And for me, that's where the track Love and Liberation, that's where the tune comes from. What
mm,
does it mean to be free? Um,
yeah,
and I suppose I don't have any answers. I only have questions.
Mm,
It's
mm.
not great for a podcast, but that's where we
No, no,
are. Is-
no, I think that's right. I think it's great to, to ask questions, and I think, I don't think there are many people that have answers to this, to a lot of the stuff that's kind of going on, to a lot of the stuff that happens, in our own lives. And I think it's right to, to ask questions. I think it's right to be curious about things and not accept, status quo. And I think it's an interesting one, curiosity. I think I mentioned it just before we started recording. I often think with curiosity is, I think, is so important, and we have it like in bundles when we're kids. We kind of grow up with this, like, what's this? Why? Constantly sort of questioning, and then it kind of starts. I don't know how you feel about it. I certainly felt like, I mean, I'm, my days at school are kind of, God, can't remember when that happened, but curiosity definitely gets kicked out. Definitely got kicked out of you. As it's like all about kind of doing your exams and blah blah blah. And curiosity is kind of so important, I feel.
yeah, I mean, for me, it's really. I mean, I did just say I have no answers, but it really is an answer and a kind of jumping off point for
Mm,
so many things, like curiosity, what is that tree called? Like, I love trees. I love being
mm.
outside. I have a
Yeah,
red
yeah,
puppy. I'm outside. I'm up the mountain most days, and
brilliant.
curiosity with, I suppose, the natural world as we describe it, although I think it should just be called the actual world, but
The
we,
world.
we can have that debate another day.
I agree. I
Um,
agree.
kind of being like, oh, what is that tree? And it would start with the names of the trees, okay? And the names as the jumping off point of following that curiosity. And then it would be like, oh, is that a native species to this
Mm,
island?
mm,
Um, and oh, it is a native species. Okay, what does that represent in folklore? And now when I go for a walk, that process of curiosity with that over a 5 or 6 year period is, oh, if I see a willow, it's a sign of healing, and
yeah.
that's where that curiosity comes from, and that's uh, where I'm reminded of it. And I think if we can be curious and kind in conversations with each other,
Mm,
there's no end to the kind of possibilities and connections that we might be able to have in a world that feels like it's otherwise constantly
mm,
dehumanizing us and separating us from each other.
I agree. Yeah.
With next of kin, the thing for me is like it's what it means to be human in today's world. And I don't know if that will make sense to anybody apart from me. Um,
It no, it does. It does to me. I mean, I mean, just kind of specifically about about trees, for example, about nature. I mean that I think that is so important, and I agree with you that I had a kind of turning moment, a real sort of turning moment, probably about 6 years ago, when and I was I was reading the book by Richard Powers called The Overstory,
Mhm.
and I was listening to an interview with him, and he said something. It was just something he said. He said we should, the problem is that humans think of humans and the rest of the world as being separate.
Yeah.
And he was even talking about life, and he said even if we start talking about not talking about our life, but thinking of ourselves as being part of life,
Mm,
then you're kind of going some way to thinking about how you can live alongside animals, plants, um, whatever else, instead of thinking of them as resources for
mhm,
us. And I think going into to your point about um, what you were just sort of talking about, and the empathy that you were showing there, I think that is I think that thinking of nature and the world in that way helps with kind of empathy and what we need to stop that sort of dehumanization instead of we start to think with a bit more empathy.
yeah.
Gosh,
It's
this is getting deep, isn't it?
I was going to say that people seem to say that to me a lot. So I'm not sure if it's just me or it's just you or it's the combination of the two of us. But either way, we're here. Yeah,
Oh my.
yeah. It's all you know, it's all happening really. You
Mm,
And I think when we get the chance to have actual conversations with each other, um, things begin to change in our
they
hearts
do.
and minds. And maybe that's very naive and optimistic, especially when you see the headlines that we're existing in today. Um,
Mm,
but I think people can discern for themselves what is true, um,
mm,
and also the powers that be would have us believe that you know
mm,
everyone is out to get us and there's more bad
yeah.
people than good, and rather than
Yeah.
operating within these dichotomies of like we're all human, um, and start there as much as
Yeah.
possible, with curiosity and with kindness and with empathy.
Yeah.
Um, and that starts with ourselves first. If
With
we,
ourselves, yeah, doing the
you
work ourselves.
yeah, if there's, you know, some days I'm definitely better at being kind to myself than others. That's
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
very true. Um, but you know, it's what it's all about, really.
Going back to like when you were a kid, what do you remember as like your kind of formative influences? Things that people, environments, whatever that really kind of shaped who you are and who you're becoming.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Um, I grew up in a council estate uh, in the north on the
Mm,
border. Um, I grew up in one of the only Catholic housing estates that were built under the Housing Rights for Catholics, um, you know, during the 70s and 80s.
mm,
It was
mm,
a housing estate, but it was a rural, so it was surrounded by fields. It was a
yeah.
small village. Um, and I think that did a lot for me.
Mm,
No, I think you know, it was definitely a case of you could go out and play all day and be quite free in that. I'm not sure how
yeah.
many people had that experience or how many kids have that experience now. Um,
Mm,
and there was always someone to play with or hang out with because you're in a housing estate. So, like, there's always
yeah.
about. And so I think there's that kind of uh, learning and kind of figuring things out whenever you're surrounded by other people. And effectively, what it was community and
Yeah.
safety and all of those things that I can say as an adult. But as a kid, it was just like, oh, who's about to play today? You know?
Yes. Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and being like, cycling to somebody's house and you would tell if they're there if the bike was out in front of the house or
Oh
not.
my God. Yeah. Even I remember those days. Yeah.
Or
My
which seems
God.
romantic and old fashioned, but um, you know, that's kind of how life was for me, rurally,
Mm,
child. Um, and I think something in there with class as well, and maybe as an adult becoming keenly aware of that.
yeah.
I went to university, but I think in terms of formative things, it was being outside and in a family sense, always being encouraged to play music or
Mm,
it's not even music, it's creativity, actually.
yeah.
Like what play had you written that week or rehearsed with your cousins,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then performing that, and like
Yeah.
that kind of, I think that kind of playfulness and encouragement it was just so formative for me.
Yeah.
And now I can say I'm so grateful for something that I absolutely took for granted and assumed that
Yeah.
everyone else grew up with, you know?
Yeah. I hear
Um,
you with that. Yeah. Yeah. It's an interest that I guess that kind of support environment, and that sort of encouragement You know, even if it's not kind of day to day kind of verbal encouragement, it's just an environment where it's where creativity is encouraged. Must have been massive. I mean, I was I mean I was sort of classically trained,
Mm.
but I wish that I'd had, you know, kind of extra support to use that in a different way that I wanted to do, rather than going back to what we were saying about societal norms and things like that. You know, I was taught to play classically and nothing outside that, and I'm starting to change that now. God knows how many years later, but it's interesting that you know, so you know what you had sounds brilliant. You know, just sort of having that kind of encouraging environment.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference there. I have a lot of friends who are trained classically. I think now I'm at a point in my career where like I can say confidently that I have little to no music theory. I've never learned music, and I don't
Mm,
have fear of being in those environments. Like I've worked with orchestras and I compose,
yes, yeah,
you know, and I write for, you know, various projects and people and films as well. And, you know, maybe early in my career at the very beginning of things, I really had this sense of self-doubt of not being good enough because I wasn't trained
mm,
a certain way. But
interesting, yeah,
yeah, but and so many of my friends that are classically trained would say, you know, we would be in the room together and they just couldn't improvise or couldn't understand how I
yeah.
could pick up any instrument and then play something, you
No, I
know.
can relate to them, to
Yeah.
what they were. Yeah, I can totally relate to that. Yeah, yeah,
You
I
know,
hear you.
and I think, you know, either way, at the end of the day, it's still music.
Mm,
Both experiences are still experience of music. I don't know if one is better than the other, or right or wrong or anything other than that's just the experience that we've had or are given.
yeah,
And for me, again, coming back to what you were saying about curiosity, it's having that curiosity to fill in those gaps, you know, not even to be a better musician, but to be able to be more creative or be more playful or communicate actually, because,
yeah,
you know, um, music is all about communication,
yeah,
mostly listening, a little bit of playing, you know. So
yeah.
I can say to someone, I can play a riff, they can play it back to me, or they'll play me a riff and I can play it. And that's my starting point. Whereas now I can be like, oh, can we play it in 3/4 time backwards or whatever the thing
Mm,
be? And
mm,
it's just a different way of communicating. But I don't, you know, that's part of the joy is bridging those gaps and working with different people, and that's why collaborating is so wonderful.
how did
Um,
you if I may, how did you get over that kind of obstacle of um you know, kind of going into, you know, where people are trained, you know, because again there's this kind of thing about, you know, being trained in a certain way, and anybody that comes in from outside who doesn't have that training is it's a bit more difficult to kind of get over that. How did you get over that
yeah.
obstacle?
I wish I could say it was a finite point and I'm over it, and those things, you know, those fears or
Mm,
insecurities won't show up again. They absolutely probably will because that's how
mm,
uh, life works in my
yeah,
experience. Um, but I suppose what I can say now is like I'm a lot more confident in those spaces, and I'm not afraid
mm,
to ask, I don't understand that. Can you explain it a different way? You know, and that's also a practice of trust and vulnerability because you know, like
true.
I've worked with two different orchestras as an artist. So as Dani Larkin, rather than working from another kind of standpoint, um,
Mm,
where the orchestra is working on my songs. So that's a different thing again.
got you. Yeah.
Um, and then I've worked with ensembles that I've written music for, um, and conducted. I cannot conduct, and it's just such a like time to me is a difficult thing anyway.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but put me in a room and ask me to conduct and read the music. Like I still can't really read music, but I can
Mm,
tell what is happening in the space and what should be happening and how it should be happening. So I suppose for me, it's just um, developing a confidence in myself. That means when I walk into that room, it's being curious and it's being calm and it's being kind and asking those questions of I don't understand how that works and putting that responsibility back on maybe the player or the person or the project or the organization that's been classically trained to open those doors a bit rather than
Mm,
you
mm,
know the experience of well, it's my responsibility to learn everything. You know,
yeah.
I've never really had that experience. I have to say, everybody that I've worked with, and Ruth, who I made next of kin with, she's classically trained, and that's, I think, one of the reasons that our working relationship really worked so well is that she could really fill in those, um, gaps in an almost theoretical way and be like, what if we fill out the sound and the
Mm,
shape of that chord? And I would never think in that way, so that's
yeah.
a meeting of minds. And I think more and more the people that want to make music want to break down those barriers. So it's not even
Yeah.
yes, it's an absolute thing of walk into the room and feel a bit more confident in what I don't know. But it's also
Yeah.
being in working environments where people actually want to make music, you know.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
more often than not, I find that people actually do want to make music, you know.
Yeah. 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 For sure.
Um,
Do you
I
feel that? I mean, no. Do you feel that the sort of situations you were describing there? It felt to me like kind of instinct
Mm.
plays. Certainly in those sort of scenarios plays a big part for you, where you're kind of feeling it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all I have to go on with like
Yeah.
my entire existence of life, you know. Not to get too meta too deep, but I think we've already crossed that threshold, Giles. It's a very instinctual thing, and sometimes the instinct is that isn't right and go in a different direction, and that might not be the right direction either.
Mm,
But
mm,
you keep going in a direction until you find that it is. Um,
yeah.
or, it's a gut feeling and it's communicating that. It's like this feels,
Yeah.
or I'm not sure about that. And finding ways, even in my band, um, I have a rotating cast of players and, you
Mm,
know, they all worked very differently and come from very different backgrounds. So um, it's finding out ways of communicating that make sense to each individual player in terms of both the music that's on the page or what they need when we're on the road together.
yeah. Yeah.
No,
You
well,
just can't. No, you hit a point there that I'm really glad you brought that up, because that's one thing that I'm interested in is when you were collaborating in whatever ways, whether it's like you say with your the musicians that you work with. I always think that, okay, you got such a different number of musicians that you're perhaps working with, all with their own personalities, the different ways of working, and you've got your own way of working and kind of like how you respond best to sort of certain situations. When you put a group in the room, it's just like kind of this sort of melting pot of differences, and how you bring those together, it kind of fascinates me.
I mean, it's a fascinating topic. Um, I think no one's really asked me about the aspect of the work that is effectively being a band leader. I
Mm,
know different musicians work in different ways, and depending on how many musicians you might have in your band, you know, some people I know would appoint one person within the band to be the band leader. So that might look like things like booking the rehearsals, making sure
mm,
who has their parts,
yeah,
um, all of those things. I do all of those things myself. Um, and it's also just relationships and kind of I think the most important working things for me are being kind and being clear.
yeah, yeah,
That in fact actually being kind is being clear, and that's a certain boundaries and being, everybody has their own rehearsal spaces differently. But for me, it's like we're here to work and we're here to work for this amount of time. Um, and a certain boundaries around that so that everybody that walks into the room knows that that's what we expect. And like, we'll take a break
Mm.
halfway through. We might go and get a coffee and a bit of fresh air and come back and whatever that looks like. But um, I think putting shape on those spaces is really important. Um, but at the end of the day, we're humans and infallibly
Infallible.
faulty and unpredictable. So
Yes. And we can all have days where things don't work out and we're just kind of like not in the shape for it, it's
more often than not, for sure.
I
Um,
mentioned I mentioned about perfectionism a while
mm,
ago. I mean, what would you call yourself a perfectionist?
oh, I would say no, but I think other people would say yes.
Would they?
I've never thought about it before. Um, Perfection, maybe it's helpful to have a definition. Um, I wouldn't attempt to make one, but something like if I give the example of writing music, right? So,
Mm,
or writing music for a new player to the band, maybe given what we were chatting about. You know, for me, when I write music, about 20% of it is the notes that are being played. You
yeah.
know, the 80% of it is how they're played, really, what's the articulation on that note?
Mm, mm.
Um, and so for me, I send over parts to people and I say things like, you know, get a feel for the song. I'm not prescriptive about you playing the parts that are on the
Got you.
page because, you know your instrument better than I do, and for you it has to be your feeling. That is
Yeah.
as valuable as my feeling with the work. So how that player is feeling. And for some players that works, or other players maybe like we were chatting about might come from a more classical world and would rather it written out exactly as what my feeling is for them to play.
Mm, mm.
But for me, the most enjoyable experiences, whether that's in the band or in an ensemble or in an orchestra setup, is when there's a bit of a flow there. And that's when the best music, for me, the most enjoyable music, is
Yeah.
made because we're all going into that together. So, you know, what am I trying to say? I think I'm trying to say that, like, my perfectionism isn't so much in the detail of the note that's being played as it is about showing up in the room,
Yeah.
present
Yeah.
in the room. Then one might argue that I'm quite a perfectionist because it's like we're here and we're committed and this is what we're doing. And it's arguably the best way to spend our time on the planet. It's writing songs and singing them, you know.
You're very right.
I
That's
hope
very
so.
true.
I hope so.
Since
Maybe
you're making a
if I
life out of it.
well, we'll see. We'll see. I'm giving it a good go anyway. Um, you've had me thinking now. I'm gonna text my friend later and be like, "Do you think I'm a
I'm
perfectionist?"
a perfectionist.
I'm curious. I don't think it will change my. I don't think it'll change me. But I'm interested to know. You know.
Yeah. And I think everybody has their, will have their different views. I mean, it's as with so many things, they're very nuanced, aren't they? And can come from quite sort of deep places.
Mm.
To have this sort of personality, these kind of traits, I guess. Kind of show themselves in us and those sort of I mean, it was interesting on instinct, for example. I mean, I used to relied much less on my instinct and
Mm.
more on my kind of like the analytical side of my brain. Whereas, like, if I was presented with a situation or a not necessarily a problem, just a situation, I'd be like, okay, well, if I do that, then this might happen, and blah blah blah, and you get kind of tied up in knots, you know. And now I rely much more on my instinct, and I always find that it's 99% of the time it's right. Just kind of go with it.
Yeah, it's trust and all of that. I mean, it's great that you're able to distinguish the difference between instinct and brain. I certainly don't a lot
Yeah,
of the time.
yeah,
And I mean, like, you know, my background in terms of education is political science, which is a very
mm,
analytical mindset.
yeah, yeah.
Mm. And I mean, I'm a Gemini, Giles, so we're both equal in each. There's definitely the capacity for the um, political science mind, but the artist heart, and I don't think those two worlds are too far away from each other. And I think you hear that in the work with Next of Kin and with Notes, and in the live settings too. On tour and on the road. Um, you get the both sides. So
Yeah, yeah.
I mean that all of that's to say, everyone listening should buy a ticket to the gig. Be good to see you.
Abs Talking of which, tell us what in terms of live show. What a brilliant segue that was. I didn't even plan it, and it just happened.
Instinct, instinct.
It is.
Yeah, I'm really excited. It's my biggest headline tour of the UK and Ireland to date. So like I have a run of in-stores coming out now with the
Yep.
record. I'll be in Rough Trade in London on the 4th. I'm actually in
Mm,
Celtic Connections on the 27th of January, but I fear this may be out by the time people know about that gig. And
yeah.
then I will be on the road in April. I'll be in Sheffield, I'll be in Glasgow, I'll be in Nottingham, I'll be in Brighton, Birmingham, Bournemouth,
Wow.
um,
Amazing.
London. Um, there's a few others on there that haven't been announced yet, but if you take a look on DaniLarkin.com, you see all the tour dates, and you know, yeah, it's a big deal for me. I hope people get something from the record when they listen to it, and then I hope they come and see the show because for me, being in the room with people is what it's all about.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Amazing. Danny, thank you so much.
Oh, what a pleasure. I really enjoyed that.